Okay, I know every generation thinks that they're the generation that's saving culture, but I think Gen Z is actually doing it. I think, okay, hear me out.
That's my opinion!
Boomers think that they invented culture, right? Gen X thinks that culture died in like 1997. Millennials think that they're the last generation that actually remembers anything important. But if we're talking specifically about entertainment and movies and Hollywood, Gen Z is saving Hollywood. Gen Z is the one that is actually saving cinema right now. Like literally, Gen Z makes up 83% of moviegoers, of ticket buyers. You know, they are the people buying tickets. We are the people that are making things trend. We are the people turning opening weekends into like literal cultural events. And I think that's kind of funny because for years, everybody said that the internet is what would kill movies, but the opposite kind of happened. We grew up online. We spent our entire lives staring at screens, right? Gen Z has had unlimited content available at all times their entire lives. And because of that, physical experiences are becoming valuable again. Movie theaters are less about convenience and they're more about like a social event now because you can watch literally anything at home. You can even watch what's in theaters at home if you really want to. And that's exactly why people are willing to leave the house for something that feels communal now. You see it in movie theaters. You see it at concerts, at pop-up experiences, escape rooms, themed bar nights, immersive exhibits and museums. We're the generation that grew up in a digital space. And now we're intentionally scheduling our social lives around offline experiences. And movies fit perfectly into that. A theater isn't competing with Netflix. You know, they're competing with loneliness and doom scrolling and another night staring at the same screen that you've already spent 10 hours of your day looking at. A great movie feels like an experience. And Gen Z, I think, understands that better than anyone right now. And what's even more exciting is that we're not just showing up to movies. Now we're old enough to be making them. For years, and you can't tell me I'm wrong, it felt like Hollywood was fucking trapped in a bubble. Every movie cost like $250 million. Every movie had to be connected to some sort of cinematic universe. Every story had to be approved by 14 different executives that haven't actually sat in an AMC in 20 years and a marketing department. And then suddenly some kid who wasn't even old enough to drink makes like the Backrooms movie.
Ugh, spoilers.
And was it perfect? No. It was actually like kind of a bad movie, but the story had issues, but who cares because it was cool, it was creative, and it was a new IP. It was a fresh concept. And yes, it wasn't the most insane thing ever, but the Backrooms movie, I think, is an incredible debut theatrical release for the director Kane, who I think is literally like 20 years old. It felt like somebody actually had an idea and got to make it. And I feel like that's what used to be normal in Hollywood. Now it feels like fucking revolutionary. And honestly, the fact that someone that young was able to make something that ambitious should make established filmmakers nervous because that is his debut. Imagine what his fifth movie when he's like 25, 26, which is still so young to have a career, especially in Hollywood. But imagine what those movies are going to be like. Like, yes, The Backrooms was kind of an overdone allegory for men's mental health. And I really didn't give a fuck about like the characters were weak. The storyline was weak, but the concept was there. And it was his first movie. Imagine what his fifth movie is going to be. And then you have movies like Obsession, which I feel like is, and we've talked about Obsession, but I feel like it is the type of movie that proves that Hollywood keeps forgetting that people do not need giant budgets. They need a vision. They need a team that all has the same vision and the same perspective. And they need a creative lead that actually has something to say. Obsession costs a fraction of what a modern franchise movie costs and somehow took the entire world by fucking storm, made like 300 times its budget in the box office in the first 2 weeks, and somehow managed to feel more relevant and more personal and more like culturally aware than half of the blockbusters released in this decade. And it's not alone. Look at movies from young filmmakers right now, like Emma Siegelman's Shiva Baby, and I Saw the TV Glow, again, The Backrooms, Chandler Levack's I Like Movies, different styles, different budgets, different voices, and they all feel alive. They feel like they were made by actual people and not a committee. And I think that's because Gen Z grew up in circumstances that forced us to become social observers. Think about the timeline that Gen Z had to live through. Most of us were children during the aftermath of 9/11, then the financial crisis, like the recession, then endless war after war after war that we're having direct exposure to via social media. And then all of the political chaos and COVID of 2020, 2021, and now the rise and takeover of AI in our society. And whatever fresh nightmare appears on our fucking phones every week, this generation experiences hardship in a very personal way. And very few generations have experienced global events in real time while simultaneously watching millions of people process them online. We aren't just living through history. We are watching everybody's reactions and experience of that history in real time. It's a completely different experience than other generations have had. And it creates this demographic of people who are so hyper aware of different systems and narratives and how stories get told and warped, and how that perspective is beginning to show up in our art. And I feel like we're getting one of the most interesting examples of this in this new genre of what me and my friends are calling incel horror. You know, like you have movies like Don't Worry, Darling and Companion and now Obsession, and they're all exploring slightly different versions of the same fear. The fantasy isn't actually about finding love. The fantasy is about removing autonomy of your partners. It's about actually wanting a partner who exists solely for your emotional needs. You know, a woman who never leaves, never disagrees, never changes, never chooses herself. The horror comes from exposing what that fantasy actually means, because if somebody has no agency and no independence and no freedom, they aren't a partner, they're your literal property. And we live in a time right now where, at least as a woman, as a young woman in today's society, I have my own place. I have my own money, my own career, my own friends. So the only thing a partner has to offer me is the way that they treat me. And what's fascinating about these stories and why I think they resonate so deeply with women everywhere is because it is so recognizable. The internet connected millions of women who previously thought that their experiences were isolated, and suddenly everybody's realizing, oh, like, this isn't just my ex, this isn't just my coworker or that weird guy I met in college, it's a pattern. And that is so powerful. The internet gave us a language for experiences that felt private and isolated, and now art is catching up. And that's where Gen Z, I think, has a huge advantage, because we understand these niche communities and we understand universal experience. You know, we've spent years watching trends emerge globally in real time. We know what people relate to because we've watched millions of people relate to it, which brings me to something I think is even more important, and that is that Gen Z isn't interested in separating high art from internet culture. We have this whole pipeline of like YouTubers to theatrical release directors. Like their debut film is coming out in AMC and coming out in Regal across the world. I feel like previous generations treated internet culture as disposable, but Gen Z treats it like folklore. You know, like we have our creepypastas, our analog horror, our viral stories, urban legends, true crime, memes, internet mysteries. Like those are our campfire stories, you know? The Backrooms was basically a modern myth. Like everybody who grew up in the age of YouTube knew what the Backrooms was, and that's why there was so much hype around this movie, even though the director was unknown and it's a brand new IP. And whether or not people like it or not, myths are where storytelling begins traditionally. We're watching filmmakers take internet folklore seriously and transform it into cinema, and that's new and it's exciting. And I think the thing that Gen Z is doing differently is we're making movies about systems instead of individuals. For decades, I feel like horror was often like one traumatized guy fighting a monster that represented his mental health. And while yes, that is like the underlying theme of the Backrooms, we're diving a lot more into the systems that put him in that position. You know, we're seeing stories about algorithms and loneliness and parasocial relationships. You know, we're getting movies about identity performances and influence culture and dating apps and artificial intelligence. The monster isn't necessarily a creature anymore. You know, the monster is the environment that we built around our main character. Because sometimes the monster is the system. Sometimes the monster is us. And I feel like that is a very Gen Z way of looking at the world, because we grew up watching systems shape people's lives every day. And when people say cinema is dying, I don't fucking buy it. I think their version of cinema is dying. The version that mistakes, budget for creativity, and the version that thinks audiences need to be spoon-fed the same fucking franchise forever. Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm looking at you. There's this version of cinema and movie going that believes young artists need to wait their turn, but that version is fucking dying, and good fucking riddance, because I think what is replacing it is so much better. The generation that grew up online is finally old enough to be making the movies we see in theaters, and now we're using everything that we've learned, every weird corner of the internet and collective trauma and shared inside joke and cultural obsession. We're using those things to build stories that actually reflect the world that we live in, and I don't think it's killing cinema. I think it's saving it. So if you've been going to the movies lately and been like, there's just nothing good out, nothing makes sense anymore, like, it's too deep, it's too political, unfortunately, you just don't get it, you can't hang, and that's a you problem, not an us problem. Sorry, Buki.